J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
Call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed to the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or in Zoom. And the clerk and I will manage any speaking order as best we can, should we be required to do so. Conformément à l'article 103G du règlement.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee, are undertaking the consideration of report to delivering Canada's future fighter jet capability of the 2025 reports 1 to 4 of the Auditor General of Canada, referred to us on June 10, 2025.
Welcome our witnesses. From the Department of National Defence, Stephanie Beck, nice to see you at committee today. The Deputy Minister, Lieutenant General Jamie Spicer-Blanchette, Commander, Royal Canadian Air Force, nice to see you as well today. Heather Sheehy, Assistant Deputy Minister Materials, along with Peter Hammersmith, Assistant Deputy Minister Infrastructure and Environment. Along with from the Department of Public Works and Government Services, Paula Folks, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, and of course from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, nice to see you, along with Nicholas Swales, nice to see you as well, sir. Each of you will have 5 minutes for an opening statement. I actually hadn't discussed who might go first, so is there a preference? If I'll turn to you. Oh, did you want to go first? That is, last time you went last, so it threw me off a little bit. So Ms. Hogan, why don't you go first then? You have up to 5 minutes or thereabouts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss our report delivering Canada's future fighter jet capability, which was tabled in the House of Commons on June 10th. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Joining me today is Nicholas Swales, who is the principal responsible for the audit. In December 2022, the federal government finalized an arrangement to buy 88 CF-35A fighter jets and associated equipment, weapons, and services from the United States to replace Canada's aging CF-18s. The prime objective of the Future Fighter Capability Project is to maintain a strong and modern fighter jet capability to defend our country and meet Canada's international defense commitments. This initiative is in its early stages. Based on the current plan, Canada's first CF-35s will be sent to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona in 2026 to support pilot training, while the first aircraft will arrive in Canada in 2028. For this audit, we wanted to know whether National Defence had achieved progress on its plans to introduce the CF-35s into service so that fighter capability would be delivered on time and on budget. We found that the estimated costs of the Future Fighter Capability Project had significantly increased, and that the project faced several risks that could jeopardize the timely introduction of the new fleet. National Defence originally estimated that the project would cost $19 billion. The audit found that this figure was based on outdated information and that by 2024, the projected costs had increased to $27.7 billion, almost 50% more than the original estimate. Some of the cost increase was caused by factors beyond the department's control, such as inflation and foreign exchange fluctuations. Nous avons constaté que la construction.
We found that the construction of 2 fighter squadron facilities to house the CF-35 aircraft was more than 3 years behind schedule. As a result, a temporary plan was necessary, which will further increase infrastructure spending. We also found that the estimated cost of the project did not include certain essential elements necessary for full operational capability, such as infrastructure upgrades and advanced weaponry. These elements would add at least $5.5 billion to the total cost. In addition, National Defence still had to address other risks that could compromise the timely entry into service of the CF-35 aircraft. For example, during our last audit of the CF-35 in 2018, we found that the shortage of qualified pilots was one of the biggest challenges facing national defense. This is still true 6 years later. The planned pilot training program would not provide enough pilots by 2032-2033, so a new approach was needed. Finally, national defense also had to finalize transition plans such as the integrated master schedule and aircraft maintenance plans. Maintaining a strong fighter aircraft capability contributes to the safety and security of Canadians. This is a large, multi-year project that requires active risk management and also frequent, timely reviews of project costs to ensure that the CF-35 fleet can be delivered on time. In the current context of increased defense spending, effective oversight and timely decision-making will be essential to optimize resources and ensure operational readiness. Chair, that concludes my opening statement, and we'll be very happy to answer any questions from the committee members. Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We very much appreciate the opportunity to appear in front of you today, and I have with me subject matter experts, and I would add it's a real pleasure to be here with our colleagues from PSPC and, of course, the Auditor General. We speak regularly, as you can imagine, lots to discuss. Et nous sommes honorés d'être ici aujourd'hui.
We are honored to represent today the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. The CF has 84,500 soldiers, sailors, and aviators, while the department has just over 30,000 employees with the receipt of the Coast Guard.
Colleagues in the form of the Coast Guard, and of course the Communications Security Establishment is also part of us. I'm sure you're all well aware of the increases in our budget recently after the commitment of the government to spend 2% of Canada's GDP this fiscal year. Mais je voulais souligner que cet argent ne va...
But I wanted to point out that this is not money just for us, but also for other governmental departments. We are responsible for the large part of it, but not for everything. I also wanted to add
money we spend as all of it going on major capital projects, but just for general reference, about 80% of our budget goes on regular operations, salaries, that kind of thing, and then only about 20% on capital projects, of which this F-35 project is part of. So given the gravity of our mandate, we must ensure we're getting the best value for Canadians' money, and I know this is something we're all worried about. This future fighter capability project is no exception. It is a massive undertaking for the Royal Canadian Air Force. There's the acquisition of the 88 aircraft themselves, but also, as the auditor has outlined, the training that's required, the weapons, the spare parts, the facilities, and much more. Through this project, we're making sure that the RCAF has the capacity they need to carry out the mandate that's been given to them by the Government of Canada. And we very much appreciate the work of the OAG and parliamentarians in supporting us in this mission. I think you know the global threat environment has changed in the last few years. The work has taken on a new urgency since this project first began. The numbers that the OAG was reporting were established before the pandemic, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we can see that the defense and security environment is much more volatile and unpredictable than it has been at any other point in recent memory. Our adversaries work independently, but also increasingly in cooperation with one another to sow chaos, discord, and uncertainty. Et en raison de cette situation combinée,
this, combined with rapid technological advances in traditional and non-traditional military domains means that we've had to redouble our efforts to equip our military with future-ready technologies that can protect us from both current and future threats. And we must meet our NATO and NORAD obligations concurrently. Quite simply, our current fighters, the Hornet, does not meet the need.
Well, for the better part of 4 decades, the CF-18 Hornet is now nearing the end of its lifespan and cannot keep pace with the challenges facing it, either with our allies or our adversaries. And some of them are being retired as early as this year, and the fleet, as you know, must be fully replaced by 2032. And in early 2023, following a fair, transparent, and open process, the government announced that we had finalized the agreement with the U.S. government and Lockheed Martin for the acquisition of the aircraft to help fulfill this requirement. This aircraft will enable us to remain closely interoperable with our allies. Most NATO allies have procured the F-35, and it will also deliver significant economic benefits for Canada. This was part of the original agreement and remains our top consideration. Canadian firms have already benefited greatly from this acquisition. We have made firm financial commitments for the first 8 aircraft, as well as to guarantee the delivery of long lead items in support of the production of the first 12 of our initial tranche of 16 aircraft. Ces appareils de propriété canadienne seront livrés.
These Canadian-owned aircraft will be delivered to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona beginning in 2026 and will be used to train our pilots and technicians alongside our allies. This training phase is essential to ensure our aircrews are ready before the first jets arrive in Canada. Deliveries to Canada are expected to begin in 2028. So, to receive these aircraft, we are building new fighter squadron facilities at Cold Lake and Bagotville. Design work and site preparation are both progressing well, and indeed construction is already underway. Key elements such as underground infrastructure, site access, and security fencing have been completed. The future fighter infrastructure will provide the space and security standards needed for maintenance, operations, administration, mission planning, and simulator training. Although permanent facilities will not be completed before the first aircraft arrive, the Air Force has developed an interim operation plan which will use existing facilities and temporary secure structures to bridge the gap.
Operating bases, so those are the ones in Cold Lake and Bagotville. We're also modernizing power, runways, and our quick reaction alert facilities across the country through the Defence of Canada Fighter Infrastructure Initiative. These upgrades, for instance, to power will also benefit the local communities. As we continue to advance the Future Fighter Capability Project, we remain deeply committed to stewardship, rigor, transparency, and accountability. Since the initial estimate of $19 billion, project costs have increased to reflect global economic conditions, the pandemic supply chain conditions, of course, but as I mentioned as well, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine also distorted the defense industry supply chain around the world, and of course inflation has been high over the last few years. But there has been no change in scope. So the changes to the budget have nothing to do with a change in scope. We have stuck to our original plans. Nous sommes sur la bonne voie pour acquérir.
Canada is still on track to acquire 88 aircraft, along with the associated infrastructure, training, and maintenance services. We will continue to follow the recommendations of experts to be able to ensure greater discipline in project management. Canadians deserve to know that this generational purchase is something that will be closely watched and be of the greatest quality possible.
To bolstering our continental defense, essential to safeguarding our sovereignty and upholding our obligations to our allies and partners around the world. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Members will note I allowed a little extra time there. We wanted to get everything Ms. Beck had to say on the record so members could consider it before their questions. Now, Ms. Folks, if you have an opening statement, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I'm pleased to be here to address the Auditor General's second report on delivering Canada's future fighter jet capability as it pertains to Public Services and Procurement Canada, or PSPC as it is commonly known. Bien que le rapport ne contienne aucune
Although there are no specific recommendations made for PSPC in the report, I will take this opportunity to highlight our role within the Future Fighter Capability Project.
As noted in the report, PSPC is the contracting authority for the fighter aircraft acquisition, and we led the procurement process in support of the Department of National Defense, who are leading on the overall project. We are also responsible for weapons acquisitions through foreign military sales program agreements with the United States government or directly from industry. In undertaking our central purchasing agent role, we work closely with our colleagues at National Defense, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, as well as central agencies, including the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, to conduct an open and transparent, fair, competitive process while ensuring the best value for Canada. In January 2023, as Deputy Minister Beck mentioned, Canada finalized an agreement with the United States government and Lockheed Martin with Pratt & Whitney for the acquisition of 88 F-35 fighter jets for the Royal Canadian Air Force. As you know, Mr. Chair, in response to an evolving geopolitical situation, the government launched a review of the current F-35 agreement, originally put in place by the Department of National Defense, to ensure it remains in the best interests of Canadians and the Canadian Armed Forces. The Department of National Defense is now leading on this front, and PSPC stands ready to support any decisions that may result from their review. Monsieur le Président, pour conclure.
Mr. Chair, in conclusion, Public Services and Procurement Canada remains committed to supporting the Department of National Defense in pursuing the Future Fighter Capability Project and in implementing the recommendations of the Auditor General of Canada. I would be very happy to any questions that the committee members might have with respect to our procurement process. And we thank you as well.
First round, it will consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Ms. Kuzi, I believe you'll start things off for us. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm going to use some of my time to walk Canadians through the timeline of the fighter jet program, sort of in an effort to evaluate if mismanagement of this program has cost Canada and Canadians our sovereignty. So we know that in the beginning, in 1997, Canada participated in varying degrees under the U.S.-led F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. This was a move which Conservatives and many Canadians supported, and we agreed that Canada should participate and stand with allies in NATO and the Five Eyes Alliance. It was during the former Conservative government in 2010 when then Defence Minister Peter MacKay announced Canada would purchase 66 F-35s and participate alongside our allies in this program. Ultimately, after an inflated report from the PBO in 2010, the then government opted to pause the contract and open competition on the F-35 program, leading us to 2015, where mismanagement delays and politicization truly begins. Upon entering office, the government canceled the F-35 contract and took us back to square one. However, this time behind schedule with our allies and at the cost of our security. Their new solution was to spend hundreds of millions of dollars examining different fighter jets, upgrading existing CF-18s, which have been described as aging and increasingly unreliable, so much so today that nearly 40% sit out of service. The government even bought used fighter jets from Australia to keep our existing fleet in the air. In 2018, the Auditor General released a report titled Replacing Canada's Fighter Jets. The biggest takeaway? The Liberal government must invest in and create a robust strategic plan to recruit and train service personnel and pilots to operate not only the future jets, but those that are currently in our possession. And then, in early 2023, 7 years after emphatically stating Liberals would not buy the F-35 fighter jet, Minister Anand announced this government would do exactly that. This time, however, at a higher cost and a delayed timeline. Still, members on this side, recognizing the importance of the F-35s, as we did during the Harper government, supported the move and urged the Liberals to move quickly with their acquisition of the jets and to ensure the critical security infrastructure upgrades needed to host the F-35 on Canadian soil were taking place, bringing us to 2025. As one of his first acts, the Prime Minister picked up on Trudeau's mismanagement and announced a re-examination of the F-35 purchase. He told Canadians that by the end of the summer, a decision would be made on the program's future. Well, it's now October 7th, and both our Air Force and allies are waiting to know where the program stands. Which leads us today, 15 years after Conservatives announced the original F-35 purchase, beginning our study on the Auditor General's June report. A report showed this program, which was projected to cost $19 billion in 2022, has now skyrocketed to a minimum of $33.2 billion, a 57% increase before a single jet has been delivered. It is my conclusion that the mismanagement of this program has come not only at a massive cost to taxpayers, but with the cost to our country's security and sovereignty. So with that, Lieutenant General, as Commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force, do you believe the management of this program and consistent backtracking to date has left your service members in the best position possible to defend our country and its sovereignty?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. So as the Commander of the Air Force, I am committed to ensuring that the members of the Royal Canadian Air Force are trained, organized, and equipped to be able to meet the demands that the Government of Canada requires of them. In so doing, I have to focus on things that are within our control, and the elements of what we're dealing with as we implement this very important and significant shift for the RCAF in terms of the advancement in technology and the advancement in our ability to safeguard Canadians and Canadian sovereignty is extremely important. So we are very, very focused on ensuring that we have all of the elements in place and as timely a fashion as possible, and we're working very closely with all of our partners within the Department of National Defence and in the other government departments to ensure success.
Ms. Hogan, a similar question to you. In your opinion, has the management of this program given you the confidence that our country is equipped to handle such a large increase in NATO commitments without more cost overruns, delays, and mismanagement?
I think what our audit found here was that there were some cost increases that were well within D&D's control and others that were outside of their control. Foreign exchange fluctuation, global demand for munitions, inflation, those were all outside of D&D's control. It would have happened no matter what jet was chosen. I do think that national defense has some difficulties in moving forward on projects. I think that all parties should agree on what the Canadian Armed Forces needs. And then we should allow the public service and the Canadian Armed Forces to deliver. it isn't about, a party decision. This is about the sovereignty and security of Canada. And I think that we should support the department to move forward with that. Could they do things better? Absolutely. There were delays in construction. There was uncertainty. They used outdated information. So, that's why we issued recommendations about a constant need for better budgeting and more accurate tracking of costs, but also more proactive risk management.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Ms. Tester-Durkin, you'll have the floor for 6 minutes, please. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks so much to our witnesses. This is obviously a focus right now among the public in general, just because of the global climate we find ourselves in and announcements by the Prime Minister to be investing more in our national defense. So I want to start with kind of the elephant in the room is the cost. Obviously, it's been brought up numerous times. So the Auditor General's report notes that in 2022, we had one projected cost, $19 billion, I believe it was. At that time, was that a reasonable estimate? And I want to kind of approach that question from the perspective of some things you've already mentioned, things that were outside of the control of the department. So when you're answering, keep in mind there were extenuating factors that were not necessarily within our control, but should we have contemplated those types of risks when coming up with an estimate of this nature? And should we have baked in contingency? Obviously, the pandemic's kind of once in a lifetime, but other stuff, global conflict, Russia, I mean, it's kind of, anybody probably could have foreseen that coming down the road. So if you could answer that question, kind of contemplating that there should be risks that we should be estimating for.
Question. It's true that every time we do costing, especially for a major project like this, it is a complex undertaking that in fact takes us months to do because of all of the different aspects that have been flagged during the review that the Auditor General did. What we try to include in every single costing that we do is a significant amount of contingency, but it's not just a flat percentage of the total project. It is related directly to, for instance, labor costs, or the costs of inflation, or the costs of an exchange rate. So at the time in 2019, the numbers that we had were the numbers that were available also through the Joint Project Office for the existing management and understanding of the costs of the operation of the aircraft, and indeed at the time the infrastructure that was being required for the F-35s. Between 2019 and the second round, the requirements for the infrastructure also changed. And in fact, in the original estimate, we had about $2 billion of contingency baked into that, and the increase to 27.7 included another $4 billion worth of contingency. So in fact, the bulk of the increase is actually in contingency funding, just in case, right? And in fact, experience has shown as we normally use all of that contingency. And I'll just add one more thing. At the time of the costing in 2019, we informed the authorities that we were about 50% confident in the numbers that we had, whereas the numbers in the 27.7 billion, we're 80% confident from an accounting perspective.
Okay, just on that note, so when you would say that you're 50% confident in your numbers, how is that managed? I mean, are there additional steps that you take to make sure that's not a very high number to be confident in when you're dealing with dollars of that magnitude?
Auditor General's point about making sure we're doing regular reviews of our numbers and being clear in our conversations, of course, PSPC, but also Treasury Board about what does that mean. And I would say not just on an annual basis. I thought the auditor was very generous in suggesting we do it annually, but definitely more often than that, and making sure that everyone is aware every time we see a significant bump. I might ask Heather to add, but we have some interesting percentages. If there's just a slight change in the foreign exchange rate, the change in our overall budget is likely to be enormous.
Thank you, Deputy. So just to touch on that, you're absolutely right. When we have a 50% confidence level, that to me, and I come from Treasury Board Secretariat, that indicates to me that we are at an early stage of a project. And then as we get towards, as we have more information, then we get to that 80% confidence level. In this instance, the only way that we could get to an 80% confidence level was to put in place a very significant contingency. So the deputy already spoke about that, but we went from $2 billion up to I have the number here. It is $6.2 billion. So that's a very significant contingency, and you could very well ask the question as to why do we need that kind of contingency? And it is exactly the types of things that the deputy referred to. Let's take foreign exchange. So I asked my team to sort of run the numbers. And for every, let me see, I'm going to use my notes here. For every cent increase in foreign exchange, that has about a $250 million impact on the project costs of this particular project. So you can imagine, there's no way that I can actually mitigate for the risks of foreign exchange outside of contingency because it's not something I can influence. And so those are the types of things that you sort of see within the contingency. And about 40% of our contingency has been notionally allocated towards foreign exchange rates. But arguably, the entire contingency there is a buffer for these kinds of impacts.
Okay, thank you for that very thorough answer. And kind of keeping on the theme of identifying and mitigating outside risks, one of the, I'll turn to the action plan, the draft action plan. So one of the recommendations was focused on identification and mitigation of risk. So in that draft action plan, you responded to one of the AG's recommendations by agreeing and committing to, among some other things, updating the risk management process. And the action plan notes that the updated risk management plan was approved in January of this year. And the senior review board was going to be briefed on that, I believe, last month. How did that go? Do we have an update on that?
So many different ways of managing the risk with this particular project. So internal to the Royal Canadian Air Force management of risk at the broader departmental level, and in fact beyond that at the Government of Canada level of the various departments that are involved in the major capital projects. So these conversations happen, of course, not just a one-off in January or indeed at specific times of the year. It's every time we meet. We look at what are we concerned about in terms of not just this project, but other major ones that we have in front of us. And then the other place, and I think this is important as well, this project is unusual in that it's run by a joint project office. So the 8 partners who are members of this Memorandum of Understanding to procure the F-35s from Lockheed Martin and Pratt & Whitney, who make the engines, they meet frequently as well, and part of their job as an executive committee of that joint project office is to manage the risks and is to mitigate and is to ensure as best we can the affordability on an ongoing basis to consider every new challenge that might arise in, for instance, a manufacturing line or in a production line, and figuring out the best way to address that. And I would include in that supply chain challenges. So it's not just one small group, for instance, that looks after risk, and it's not just one risk management plan. It's a much more holistic approach.
Thank you. That is your time. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire pour environ 6 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And to the witnesses, thank you for your presentations. Ms. Beck, you mentioned you are holding steady on the F-35, and you are analyzing the contracts. Does that mean that there are other possibilities that the F-35 might be studied? And what can we expect for any type of adjustment? I do know that it's being broadly discussed, not only within the government, but outside the government. Our role in the review is to provide the facts. This is what we know about what is happening with the project, with the procurement, and also the long lead items, and all the purchases. What are the costs, how they might change with world changes as well, and what can we do to mitigate these pressures So it's about what we know, not about how it's going to work. And we base the decision on that. Well, clearly, we're in a political era where Canada wants to demonstrate a certain amount of independence vis-a-vis the United States. And we know that there are some spare parts. Well, it is the Pentagon that controls the spare parts and also the software that will be used in the aircraft. So what is going to happen? Will that be brought back to Canada? As I have said, this is a project. I've just said that. So the spare parts that are in each of the aircraft come from all over the world. So really, you can't halt the project totally. And you talked about the software. It's all the different governments that are part and parcel of the development of the software. So it's not impossible, I admit, but it would be very difficult to do. We always talk about the kill switch. Well, that means nobody in one plane could communicate with another plane. That just doesn't exist, and there is no kill switch that exists in planes. Well, these are questions that I had. October the 2nd, one of the witnesses spoke about the $1.75 billion in terms of purchases with the United States. So what do you have to say about our independence versus the United States? Well, we do have data over some months past and over years as well. And so it's normal that there would be announcements made by governments. But one of the major decisions taken recently for over-the-horizon radar that comes from Australia, it's an enormous investment for the future of Canada to protect our sovereignty. And also there's another enormous project that we have ahead of us, that is the purchase and building here in Canada of the destroyers. Is that the right word in French? Yes. And the submarines as well. They're not going to come from the United States. So there is a pivot elsewhere than towards the United States. They make good products, but they are made good products are made elsewhere as well. Many of the exports go to the United States. The interoperability is certainly important, but could I ask what is Canada's contribution to the building of the F-35? We have an aerospace industry in Quebec that can do much from A to Z, and perhaps that could have been taken into consideration a bit. What is the real contribution that Canada is making to the building, the construction of these aircraft? At present, currently, there's some 30 Canadian companies building each different parts of these planes, more than $3 billion worth. And in addition, there are contracts that are emerging. It's almost every month that Pratt & Whitney and Lockheed Martin are looking for new partners to build these different planes. We know things are going well in Canada. It's working. You want to know for Quebec? Well, very specifically, I could add, if the Canadian companies didn't supply these parts, the planes couldn't fly. It's that critical for the future of each of the planes. Howmat Aerospace.
Casting, sorry to the translators. Optical bed casting, Nav Aids Limited, and they make port covers and pressure test adapters. Enfin, vous voyez, et il y en a d'autres.
So you see, these are examples of what's being done. The Government of Canada has been helping for years now to promote the industry in Canada through Industry Canada, through ISET. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Une opportunité, Monsieur Lemire a posé des questions.
Mr. Lemire has asked his questions.
Members with various times. Monsieur Detel, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Mr. Daltel. Hello, everyone, colleagues, General, Madam, Auditor General. Hello, thank you for all the service that you have done, Lieutenant General, in Haiti and elsewhere. And you started in Valcartier. That's where you began your career. I'm chauvinistic, but I'm very proud of you. But with respect to the excessive cost, going over the cost projections, it was $19 billion initially, and it's moved up to $27 billion. Things aren't looking so good in the future. There is future risk for increase. So we are public accounts. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and people who are listening to us now, they have to pay their tax, they have to pay their GST. But what does it mean to them, this type of figure? Chairman, I could refer you to our report because it does give further detail on the rise from 19 to $27 billion. I would say there are costs that were out of control of national defense, out of its control totally, but there was risk. And so perhaps if there had been more proactive risk management, it might have been different. But there was an increase. There were also elements out of control, out of their control. There were, for example, estimates for a more modern, a more up-to-date fighter aircraft that could have been used, and also the need to have an interim infrastructure for the maintenance of the aircraft and for the training of pilots. So I believe it's an issue of better risk management. I know there is a lot of risk. There are 6 that have not yet been approved. 2 of these risks were linked to inflation and foreign deficit. So some risks, though, could have been better controlled. So how can you be sure that it'll be better controlled in the future? You've said it very clearly. There's the matter of infrastructure, installations, runways that will have to be built for this type of plane to land. But what type of saving can be made with respect to infrastructure? What kind of message is being sent to Canadian taxpayers who over the past 10 years have been facing great difficulties in terms of tax? Well, $5.5 billion that would have been added to the price. Well, it has to do with project management, but it is my responsibility to explain to people what the overall price is, what the cost is, and to make a comparison with other projects. But I think that we also have to look at the gaps that exist, the gaps that we found. There should have been more proactive risk management, but there has to be an understanding of the price of the cost of the project. It has to contain all the essential elements built into that pricing. Well, it seems to me that history is repeating itself. In 2018, it was the helicopters, where the government that was elected abolished the program that was set up to refresh 30-year-old helicopters. And in 2015, a newly elected government did exactly the same thing, canceled the contract. And what has happened years after? Well, now we are facing exactly the same decision. The people who are listening to us must wonder about the political dimension of all this. The Chrétien government and the Trudeau government both abolished things that 10 years later and cost much, much more than initially. The concern with respect to the politicization of debate now. We know this, why 30 years later the same error is being made with the same government, the same party that is in power? Well, I don't think you should be asking me this question to explain why certain elected members decided to make the decisions that they did in fact make. Parliament has to decide what the Canadian Armed Forces should look like, what they need to ensure our sovereignty. National defense needs, what they are, the needs of national defense to build and protect. Well, that's it. 5 minutes. 5 minutes goes very quickly.
You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll attempt to take the politics out because I'm not sure what punishing Mr. Chrétien or Mr. Trudeau will do, but focusing on how we improve the future is what I'm interested in. I know that the Joint Striker Fighter program has certain requirements that need to be met before the jets can be delivered. Can you update us on what measures are being put in place to ensure that we will meet those requirements so that we can receive the fighter jets?
So I believe I can help to answer that one. In concert with the Future Fighter Capability Project and the Project Office, we're working together to ensure that the implementation plans are continually monitored and updated. And one of the key plans in that, and it was mentioned by the Auditor General in the report, is the Master Implementation Plan. So this is the overall document and entity that is guiding the Royal Canadian Air Force in concert with our other partners and colleagues to ensure that all of those different various pieces are in place. One of the elements that I also have is, or that we also have, is the Fighter Operational Implementation Working Group. So that is a governance structure that meets regularly and is also comprised of several sub-working groups. So in fact, 13, because they're all looking at different elements from information systems, infrastructure, security, training. There are several. And so it's important that the Fighter Operational Implementation Working Group maintain that cohesion that we need to make sure that things are all progressing and being tracked and monitored on a routine basis in order to meet the milestones that are outlined in the Master Implementation Plan. So we review that. It is a living document because conditions certainly change rapidly, and it is something that we're committed to continuing to refresh as often as possible, and that is our guiding document to achieve what you've asked.
Okay, so we are on track to have those measures in place to receive the jets when the jets are ready.
At this point in time, yes, we are. And as mentioned in the Auditor General's report, we know that the permanent infrastructure of the two fighter squadron facilities, so those are the two main squadron buildings. I was going to say hangar, but they're very, very large. So they're giant. One in Cold Lake and one in Bagotville. Those will not, the permanent infrastructure will not be ready until 2031 is the projected time. However, we have interim plans that are all on track, and that's going to involve some temporary training facilities. It's going to involve temporary hangars and hangarettes that are sort of small structures that are able to shelter the F-35s as they start arriving in Canada, projected to be in 2028.
Okay. The air control and air attack capability, can you talk about that and whether or not we are ready in terms of those two aspects as well?
Forgive me, which air control?
So with respect to Canada's future fighter jets, national defence is also responsible for improving the Canadian Armed Forces air control and air attack capacity or capabilities.
Air control. I believe those are, if I'm understanding correctly, capability sets that we achieve with the fighter aircraft. So that would be all encompassing with the type of training that we provide our air crew. So as far as I know, that's something that is being worked on, and I don't know of any delays or challenges with that.
Okay. In terms of the shortage of pilots, engineers, aircraft maintenance, can you talk about your recruitment strategies to ensure that we have those resources in place to receive the jets in a timely manner?
So we have a number of efforts in place because it is well known that we have been short on personnel, and as was mentioned and highlighted in the fighter force specifically, there has been a shortage of pilots and a low number of technicians. So we have put many initiatives in place, and there's no one size fits all that is going to fix everything. However, we are seeing progress in the numbers, and they are increasing. So for example, some of the proactive enrollment of skilled pilots has taken place, and we have been able to reattract some pilots who had retired back to the RCAF. Some of that was due to an increase in pilot pay specifically, which took place before the most recent increase in pay to all military members this past summer. So those are having a positive effect of attracting some members to return to the force if they had left. And if we have those skilled applicants with that experience, then that is something that we prioritize, and we have people in place to help them return and go through that re-enrollment process more effectively. We also have a number of subsidized educations and recruiting allowances that are in place on the technician side, and we are working with many civilian colleges that offer some of the training so that we can leverage the training that is happening with the academic industry or academia right now. And we are able to work with them as partners and subsidize some of the training or the education so that those technicians can then join us. So in terms of current staffing levels, our most recent report to this committee in June we've seen increases in the fighter pilot staffing level has increased up to 70.5% of what it was. It had been last reported at 66%. So this is a positive improvement that we must absolutely maintain. And for our maintenance personnel, we're up to 86%, which is up 1.6 from June. So a lot of these efforts in concert are working to ensure that we can not only attract new members to come through, but in many cases retain the experienced members that we have invested so much in, certainly in terms of a fighter capability.
Thank you. That is your time. Yeah, thank you. And well over. I wanted to get a full answer from the general. Thank you. Suivant encore, c'est M. Lemire pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Today, Prime Minister Mark Carney in the States has said that Canada would invest $1,000 billion over the next 5 years. That is certainly significant military expenditure. But during the election campaign, they talked about elbows up, elbows up. So it seems to me now we are increasing our dependency on the United States. What is the highest, do you have the highest security levels on the military bases? When you get the F-35s, that's very important. How have you assessed the cost of this need, and what will you be able to cost it in the future? Well, the questions aren't really related, but I can answer the two inaudible. I'll give the floor to my colleagues to allow for a better answer. But what I said with respect to procurement and the purchasing of acquisitions, we want to be able to diversify our sources in terms of national defense's needs. Australia, the UK, Europe, we're buying from all of them. And trips, calls, visitors that we have from abroad, well, they initiate that to be able to obtain resources that they would be able to use in their country. Because basically what we want to do is to create a stronger, more robust, more resilient industry for the future. Now, as to security for the different infrastructures for the F-35, I'd ask my colleagues to answer. But this was done after 2019, so this represents another challenge for us in terms of costing. But it's an infrastructure that could be used not just for repairs for the aircraft, but also for training, for maintenance, and so on. If you think
of a big compartmentalized security room, so a classified room, it's basically that over the aircraft. But je sais pas si... Ouais, vas-y, Pete, alors.
Go ahead, Pete. I can help. Unfortunately, a lot of these words are technical. I can only say them in English. Well, we have an excellent team of interpreters. What is the specific need for the F-35? From the perspective of infrastructure, there's a simulator, a team that is there for simulations, flight simulation. There are power requirements and inch-back that are required for this type of equipment. You got logistics to maintain the planes. More space for the F-35 is required. And also there is the electronics, inch-back as well. And from the perspective of security, the building envelope is such that you have to put heavy steel plates around on it, and that adds a lot to the cost.
Foundations, the columns, the beams, because of the weight of those heavy steel plates that are on the building for security purposes.
Donc, vous nous dites que ce n'est pas spécifiquement des demandes des...
So it's not specifically at the request of the United States. No, this is a need, GPO, joint JPO need.
Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you so much.
For 5 minutes, please.
I'd like to say thank you to all the witnesses that have come today. Lieutenant General Spicer, I want to say thank you for the service you've done to Canada. Congratulations on your post, and thank you for everything you're going to do for Canada. In the last couple days, we know that the government has committed on the first 16 planes. The rest, I feel, reading the news and seeing what the Prime Minister is saying, is kind of up in the air. Given the current state of the geopolitical state of the world, how important is it to prioritize obtaining these fifth-generation F-35s?
Thank you for the question. Maybe if I start and then Jamie will jump in. But the importance cannot be overstated of having a fifth-generation aircraft, because that is what our adversaries have. So our role to deter and defend Canada and Canadians means that we need to have equipment that will create a dilemma in the minds of our adversaries. We want to look difficult to approach, unfriendly, in fact.
Get your remarks, Lieutenant General Spicer, as well.
Thank you, and I can absolutely echo what the Deputy Minister is saying. Our adversaries are advancing in their technologies at a very rapid pace, and at the moment, both China and Russia have fifth-generation fighter aircraft and fifth-generation missiles that are able to go at much greater speeds and with much more lethality that are holding Western allies at risk at this moment in time. Therefore, the sooner that Canada is able to transform to a fifth-generation Air Force. And I'll note that even though the term fifth generation is associated with the advanced technology of certain fighter aircraft, it's actually also going to apply to some of the other aircraft that we are procuring in Canada. So when we think about the weaponry and the different missiles and weapons that will be acquired, these will also be usable for the P-8 Poseidon for maritime surveillance, and also the MQ-9 Bravo remotely piloted aircraft system, which are very important. So for us, that is a key focus as we transform, and it does also speak to the security requirements that are simply different with this kind of advanced technology, which is necessary to effectively and credibly deter our adversaries.
So for someone like yourself, which I would consider the expert. Is it concerning that the Prime Minister is having second thoughts on fulfilling the second part of that contract?
I am very committed to providing the Prime Minister with all of the information that he needs to make a reasoned judgment, and I am focusing on doing just that.
Thank you. And in your opinion, is a mixed fleet feasible? Meaning if we altered from the F-35 and went another direction, is that feasible? And what kind of cost overruns would that be? Maybe Ms. Beck could also jump in on the cost side.
So in terms of mixed fleet, with the transition from the F-30 to the F-35 with the F-18, we in fact will be operating a mixed fleet for a certain amount of time as we draw down the number of F-18s and increase the number of F-35s. That will be a very intricate and very deliberate endeavor, given the shortages that we have mentioned. So we will be monitoring that very closely to ensure that we are providing our personnel with the right training and exposure so that we're able to maintain our operational commitments throughout that, which is also involving a very important discussion with NORAD, North American Air Defense, as our key partner in continental defense. We are more than interoperable with the United States for NORAD to protect this continent, and that is something that we aim to maintain throughout this transition. In terms of a mixed fleet, we see very positive opportunities looking towards the future as we get beyond 5th gen and towards 6th generation aircraft, which are in development. They're in early development now with allies and partners. And so this is an area that we are looking into and working with our research and development partners to learn more about.
Thank you very much. And so I guess where I was going is my concern would be that as I would like to see us fulfill the F-35 contract. I wouldn't like us to go backwards and obtain 4th gen fighters. Very interesting that you put forth that there's 6th gen fighters. That's being developed. That's exciting. I would like to see that we fulfill that contract given the geopolitical status of where the world is today and where we're going. Is there any talk of going backwards and possibly procuring 4th gen fighters, or no?
What we have as direction is to continue with the contract, with the MOU, with the arrangements that we have in place until we hear otherwise. We are full steam ahead, focused on making sure we've got the infrastructure, the pilots, the training in place for the arrival of those F-35s.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is your time, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just you were a little over there. So up next is Mr. Housefather for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And I heard attentively Mr. Kirk's questions. Ms. Folks, when we went to tender for, or we, did the multiple processes of the bidding for the contract that was eventually awarded for the F-35s, nobody was talking about Generation 4 fighters, right? We were looking at Generation 5 fighters, even in that context, whether it was the SABs or the F-35s.
Thank you very much, Mr. Housefather, for the question. So Canada implemented an open and transparent competitive process that included high-level mandatory requirements. And so we were open to any allied fighter aircraft that was in production that could meet those requirements. We established a list of qualified suppliers that included both 4th gen and 5th gen fighter aircraft. And in that process, our goal was to make sure that all of the qualified bidders could see a competitive path forward and that they would be able to demonstrate their strengths. And to realize that, Public Services and Procurement Canada oversaw the evaluation of the bids, as is part of our role as a contracting authority to preserve the integrity of the procurement process. We employ the services of a fairness monitor. We also contracted a third-party reviewer to examine our procurement approach and all key documents. We also employed red teaming, which brought together experts from across all 3 core departments to neutrally and objectively assess and challenge the rigor of the evaluation process. And the evaluation process, of course, looked at cost, capability, and economic benefits. And in that process, the F-35 was the preferred bidder across all of those evaluation domains. Thank you.
So let me ask a different question, Ms. Hogan. When you looked at the costs and the higher cost than anticipated on the F-35s, did you also ever look at, for example, Finland that contracted for the F-35s in 2021? I think they were the most recent partner that had bought them right before us in 2023. Did you look to see if they had similar issues in terms of the earlier anticipated cost? I think theirs was $9.4 million.
So it's very difficult to do a comparison like that. Coming out of the joint, I'm going to get it wrong, the Joint Strike Fighter Program Office, everyone's getting the same cost for the aircraft. Then where you'll have differences is infrastructure upgrades and training and so on. So I can only assume that every country would pay a similar price, but it's very difficult for us to gain access to that information, and so we did not do a comparison country to country.
Okay, so we didn't compare with other countries to see if they had similar issues in terms of initial projections versus costs after a couple years?
So we didn't look into that. What I can tell you is when National Defense prepared their estimate, it was based on information that was 2 years old, and there was more up-to-date information. So I don't know what other countries would have done, but Canada could have used the more up-to-date cost for the aircraft.
Thanks. And Lieutenant General, congratulations on your nomination. A couple of questions for Defense. First of all, on the pilots, you had mentioned in terms of obviously a big challenge is making sure we have pilots, but beyond technicians and other people to operate. You had mentioned bringing people back who had retired from the armed forces. Would that be a temporary solution because we eventually have a mandatory retirement age that they would reach? Or is that a more permanent solution because they retired at such a young age that they would still be able to fly for another dozen years?
So we welcome anyone who is up to the compulsory retirement age of 55 or even can extend to 60 years of service. So we are always looking for volunteers to the force. And so many of them are younger. And as long as they are still fit to fly and meet all of the requirements, then they are able to do so until those age limits apply. We are also working on increasing recruiting and the throughput through our training systems, which includes, in fact, a full modernization of our training aircraft fleets for all air crew. And all of those fleets, in fact, we're replacing 5 fleets, and 4 of the 5 are from European partners. So, and many are being manufactured in Canada. So we're definitely working across multiple areas to be able to increase the number of pilots we have in the Air Force overall, but then specifically for the fighter fleet.
Do you have any time left, Mr. Chair?
You do, yes.
Okay.
You got a good minute.
Okay, perfect. So I want to come back to Mr. Kirk's last question in terms of the challenges that would be posed if the more jets, we go from the Hornets to the F-35s, we may have Generation 6 jets coming up. Pilots are not automatically qualified to fly one aircraft when they're qualified to fly another aircraft, correct? And maintenance crews would have to learn various different aircraft. So it does pose a challenge. I mean, I understand it's not an insurmountable challenge, but certainly having multiple different jets, certainly introduced at the same time, if we were to take 16 F-35s plus go to another supplier for the others, would pose a number of challenges, which I assume would increase costs. Would it not?
So it would. That is a correct assumption. It would duplicate a certain amount of infrastructure and training and different support requirements. They would be different for each of those types of aircraft. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Housefather. Beginning our third round, 5 minutes. Pardon me, 5 members with various times. Mr. Stevenson, you'll lead us off, please.
Thank you. Thank you for our presenters here. I'll try not to repeat much what has been said before, but to Ms. Beck and Lieutenant General, probably just a yes/no on this. From what I'm hearing before, you are 100% on the F-35s. You have no doubts that any change to a different plane is going to come from the political end. Not you guys. You guys have all decided this is where you're going for this, right? If there's any change, it's going to be from the Prime Minister or their side to go away from the F-35 at this point.
You're right. We are public servants. We offer the facts, and the decisions are made, and we take guidance from our elected leaders.
Okay. And maybe, I'm not sure if this is for Ms. Hogan or not, but if there was any change, can you tell me what the costs would be if for any other cancellations of going forward? I thought that there was in there somewhere, but what the consequences would be to have any change if they did go away from that.
So I think there's committed costs that have already been incurred. There's a commitment right now to purchase, or at least at the time of the audit, it was to purchase 4 aircraft and then parts for 8 others, long lead parts. I don't know if that's progressed since then. So obviously that would be committed. But then the nation-to-nation agreement would have to change, or Canada would just not call up the rest of the planes. I think that's something that National Defence could help you better understand.
I guess from what I'm reading and what I see from your answers, that it's best to get this done and get forward on the F-35. So then it goes back to managing costs. And maybe Ms. Folks can answer part of this. In my reading, there's the Defence Construction Canada, and I'm not sure, maybe you can clarify what the difference between PSPC is and the Defence Construction Canada part, and who is responsible for dealing with the costs and overruns on that side of it.
Thank you, sir. So Defence Construction Canada is within Public Services and Procurement's portfolio, and it is the organization that would undertake the construction for national defense. It has specific authorities under the Defense Production Act and is reporting up through the responsible minister of Public Services and Procurement. One thing I will say about the costs with respect to infrastructure, and this speaks to the 50% fidelity that we had back in 2019, there are quite a few secure requirements that all members of the joint program for the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter program, have to meet. And it is not until you make a purchase decision and inform the Joint Program Office of that purchase decision that you're able to receive a lot of the information around infrastructure. And so that is part of the reason why we didn't have that information in 2021 and towards the end of 2022. Once you make the procurement decision, you're then able to receive a lot more information on infrastructure and other highly complex requirements that allow you to have greater fidelity of costing. Thank you.
Yeah, I was, my main thought on this is who's responsible for the cost versus the decision to purchase the F-35s. I do have another question, and I'm not sure, probably in the, Ms. Backer or Damon, but a few years ago, the government, the current government had a strategy where they were going to green government, and they said that the F-35 was going to be part of that. Is that still part of the mandate in making for net zero going forward? And I'll leave it that part first, if it is yes or no, and then we'll go from there.
We're pretty proud of, not specific to the F-35 program, and I'll let Pete elaborate, but we have recently, for instance, through Defence Construction Canada, started the construction of the first net zero housing in the Government of Canada.
So can you tell me of any other NATO country that actually has a requirement on their defense to actually do greening of their...
I can jump in and perhaps try to help answer. A number of other countries in NATO do have greening targets generally for the work that they do as part of government, and that includes their defense departments. I wouldn't speculate on how many, but a number of nations do have some of those targets built in.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, no, but the Ms. Stevenson's time is done, but please go ahead.
Very quick elaboration. So one thing that we are partnered with, a Global Air Chiefs climate change collaboration. So it's essentially a club of air forces that are working together to try to share best practices and work with one another to enable climate change, and it does include some of the greening of our fleet. So some of it is, of course, reactions to climate change and humanitarian assistance type elements, but there's also a very robust discussion on synthetic aviation fuel, and we are using that in the RCAF to positive effect. So there are some greening efforts that are, I would say, embedded throughout different parts of the organization.
Indeed, and if I could add, just as we build buildings, we build them to a higher standard now than we did in the past, including net zero or net zero ready buildings, and we will be doing that as part of the infrastructure for the fighter.
Thank you. As long as it's not tanks. I represent CFP Gagetown. We need diesel to run those things. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for sharing those greening efforts and initiatives from Defense. It's something that it's really good to hear, especially with all our climate change issues. Thank you. Ms. Beck, why was the construction of the fighter squadron facilities in Cold Lake and Bagotville more than 3 years behind the original schedule?
I think we've touched on that a little bit, but I am happy to elaborate, and maybe Pete would want to jump in here too. Really, it's because the specifications changed. The articulation in the early years of the project was the Joint Project Office was requiring a certain kind of hangar, and it's much more than just a hangar where we park the aircraft at night. And that changed to require much greater security, including those steel plates that Pete was talking about earlier. But I would add that that then meant a much longer and more expensive supply chain to ensure that the steel from birth, I'll call it, that makes it into the hangar has been protected all the way along that supply chain. So strictly speaking, security costs alone would have gone up because of the need to make sure the entire supply chain was secure. So you don't end up with steel in your building that has other things in it, for instance.
Okay. The Auditor General's report indicated that there was insufficient departmental engineering personnel to serve as support equipment for both the CF-18 Hornet and CF-35A during the transition. How is the Defense Department overcoming this shortage of engineering personnel?
So I can answer that one. Thank you for the question. The maintenance support personnel is an area that we are continuing to work on because we do not, as mentioned, have an abundance of them. However, this is an area that we're continuing to work with. Part of it is with in terms of that engineering support, there's the maintenance support, but then there's also the vehicle techs and others that are supporting different areas of the squadron and the squadron facility. Some of them actually come from the Canadian Army, so we're working on ways to work with them to be able to mitigate. But we also see potential for a future opportunity to work with industry, someone in Canadian industry who can perhaps help us to mitigate that shortage, and this is an area that we could look into future contracting for. So since we still have some years, it's on our action plan of things that we must look at and must continue to address and monitor, but there are options that we'll consider as we go forward.
There's so many moving parts.
There are.
And I'll continue asking you a question. Are there any best practices that Canada can learn from regarding the procurement of Canada's future fighter jet capability from previous major procurement projects?
And probably lots of people who'd want to comment on this particular one. I think one of the things that has been unusual but helpful in many ways is having this joint project office, in that the intent is to share the risk and share the burden. In today's speak, it's crowdsourcing of development and research and innovation and getting the best from each country that will then be fed into the creation of this new aircraft, and not just the operation of it, but the maintenance as well. So you're getting the best of every best Air Force in all of the partners that are belonging to this particular organization. And that means that you're spreading the burden of cost of the research and development. And in fact, the U.S. government has shouldered by far the largest amount of the cost. So we're getting good return on investment from an R&D perspective. You can't do that everywhere, but it is one good outcome of this particular structure. But Heather, who has just come from Treasury Board Secretariat, or Paula might have more to add.
I think, Deputy, you raised one of the best points on this particular procurement, because this allows us to work with our partners. So in this particular project, there are 8 partner countries. So allies, US, Canada, Australia, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, UK, and Norway. But in addition to that, there's 12 other countries that are actually participating that can actually purchase this, or have indicated that they're going to be purchasing this equipment through foreign military sales. So I have to say, like, this allows us to be part of a team, of an international team. So it allows us to have that interoperability, and it also allows us to have those economies of scale that the Deputy was talking about.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll echo what my colleagues have stated. I think the other piece that's a really great practice here is the fact that we are joining a user group of all of our NATO allies that are in the Five Eyes group, and being able to share that information. We have also the Canada, Australia, UK reprogramming lab, which is extraordinary and is a tripartite effort to develop the mission data sets that we'll use for the CF-35A. And as Heather pointed out, the economies of scale is really important. It allows us to get best customer pricing. It also allows us to join bulk buys, which bring our pricing down. And when you're looking at the fact that this particular aircraft would have over 3,000 units worldwide, around 2,000 of them within our continent, it provides increased opportunities for our industry, who are already providing over $3 million worth of parts on existing aircraft, and we haven't even received them in Canada yet. So we anticipate that that could grow, and that would be good for our economy. One thing that I think is challenging is that I don't know that any of us in this room thought in 2025 we would have so many regional wars and also see a war in Europe. That geopolitical situation was hard to forecast, but I think we do need to do a better job of that and have our costing match more worst-case scenarios instead of reasonable scenarios, because the world is changing, and much of the cost increase and changes actually is because the threat is proliferating rapidly and the threat is changing, and we have to achieve overmatch so that we can bring our women and men like Lieutenant General Spicer-Blanchette home so that we can continue to undertake the missions asked of us by our government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Suivant encore une fois, Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. The further commander of the RCAF indicated that there could be a mixed type of, a joint type of planes, not just F-35s, that there could be squads made up of other planes, even made by Bombardier. But I've understood recently that there would be an agreement to possibly produce these in Quebec. So there would be an economic boost for Quebec, for Montreal itself, and that would be a boost in pride for Quebec, and that would provide a generation that would be adapted to our reality, to our own reality. We could be at the very, and we are in fact at the very heart of innovation. When you talk about interoperability, why was this not followed up? This was something that was thought about. Well, there were a variety of companies and a variety of countries that were wondering what that would amount to if that were undertaken. And so not only European countries were thinking about it, Japan as well. and was involved, and we wondered how to proceed. There were a variety of options. You know, during the pandemic, we had to put our eggs in several baskets because we had to develop vaccines, and people worked together. Could we do the same thing for the next generation of planes? One thing is sure. You want to get into different programs sooner rather than later. As the Auditor General said, we know a lot more detail about what costs are, what the opportunities are for our own Canadian companies. So if you're in it at the very beginning, it affects everything. Yeah, but why didn't that come into account? Why was that not taken into account? Why didn't that weigh heavily for Quebec industry?
Evaluation of the different bids, they would always take into account what the economic benefits are, and that would have been part of the assessment at the time. I don't know what Saab was proposing at the time, but that would have been part of the assessment.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I also would say this. Recently, L3 Harris, our strategic partner for Canada, is there for support. Our fighters, our F-35s, and essentially our goal is to establish a regional depot, if you like, where 2,000 fighter planes could be repaired in Quebec, in Mirabel. So I understand it is very attractive to think about 88 fighter jets, but it represents 75% of the cycle of the lifespan of these planes is in maintenance. And that is where you see other opportunities that may well come to exist. For example, some sort of depot where the engines themselves can be maintained. That's an opportunity for Canada.
Mr. Couric, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would like to. So the Auditor General found major overruns within the D&D's control. What was within the D&D's control that led to these overruns? I think maybe for. Sure.
I could try,
Sure.
and then I think D&D could speak to the rest. So for us, one of the first things was the fact that the original estimate was based on outdated information. As I mentioned, there were cost estimates for the aircraft themselves that were more up to date, that could have been used, that came out of the Joint Strike Fighter Program Office. So they could have started with that. There were elements that, in our view, were missing from the full costing of the project. But as I mentioned earlier, D&D manages their projects slightly different. So some of the power grid upgrades and infrastructure needs were put into another project that I think should have been thought about here. And then just the delays, right? The delays, anytime you delay something, costs have the potential to increase. And in this case, needing temporary infrastructure for maintenance and for training is driving up the costs that weren't planned at the beginning.
Thank you. No, that's very sufficient. To Ms. Beck, there was mention of temporary facilities and what kind of cost overruns. We have temporary facilities because in the report we're 3 years behind on the major 2 facilities. What kind of cost to the taxpayer is this? If you can answer.
So those amounts would be included in the $27.7 billion, that particular package of costing. And I know the term is temporary, but if you think of them more as transitional, because it's not a piece of infrastructure or a piece of equipment that we will throw away at the end. On the contrary, they can be used for other purposes. So it's not wasted money.
Okay, thank you for your clarification on that. Now, would you agree to mitigate some of the cost in the foreign exchange that we talked about? I mean, my colleagues on the other side here were trying to figure out where these costs are coming and maybe taking the heat off of what I would say is mismanagement, but would just simply building things on time save the taxpayer a lot of money?
And Pete might want to add, but we have done our own internal research, and the costs of inflation on defense equipment is even higher than regular inflation. And infrastructure, especially the infrastructure that we're building in the north, is even higher than it would be in the south of Canada. And of course, a lot of our infrastructure is being built in the north. So each extra month, each extra year that takes, definitely there is a greater cost. Sometimes there's a trade-off in that there's better technology available if we're building it later, right? You get version 6 instead of version 4. Hard to judge if we would have spent the equivalent amount of money in doing the upgrades.
That answer. I would like to ask also, too, flipping back to the 5th gen technology, who else is building 5th gen planes? It's the U.S. and
China and Russia.
Okay.
And we're not buying those.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. So I guess the only pathway forward for us, and you've both recommended, is the F-35. Thank you for that. And the 6th gen technology.
Yeah.
If you could speak on it, and as well as the expert, Lieutenant General, how far away is that?
Mm-hmm. I think the general better to speak on the expert part. But the research and development is underway, as I was saying, amongst many countries, and earliest, mid-30s, mid-2030s. More likely to be what you would get is almost a prototype in the mid-2030s, and then it would evolve after that. Okay. So again, if you get in early, you get to shape it. But the general knows more about the difference between 5 and 6.
Be amazing.
Certainly, thank you. So as the Deputy mentioned, it is certainly in developmental and research phase now. And in fact, some of the numbers, depending on how the prototypes go, it is late 30s and 2040s. However, the other things that we are pursuing in the meantime are autonomous combat platforms as one. So these are meant to be different drones that can accompany fighter jets. There will be opportunities, I believe, and we're certainly working more closely with Canadian industry while we talk to allies and partners who may be doing research as well. There's a lot more collaboration opportunity ahead, and I believe that those are areas that will be a benefit to us as we look to what we need in the future, because as mentioned, if we start now, those investments can actually help yield the technology and the things that will give us that operational overmatch in the future.
So if we actually pivot now, or we're not sure right now, we could create the perfect storm, or we could again be behind if we don't act out and fulfill what I think Ms. Beck alluded to earlier, saying all parties came to a decision, which we all did, and again, we find ourselves behind. And by the mid-30s, if we don't execute now and fulfill F-35s when it comes time to upgrade, we could actually be more behind and cost the taxpayer a lot more money. So,
Mr. Chair, I'm going to stop right there because you're over. I've let a few people, but I will wait for an answer. I will allow an answer, yes, but I wanted to just. I don't know if I asked the question. No, well.
We're focused on delivering what we have, right? We have commitments in place. We need to continue and maintain those, but we always, as the General said, have an eye to the future. And maybe just one point on that, on drone technology, we're seeing the rate of change in the war in Ukraine is unseen, staggering. Every few weeks, there's a different version of a drone or a different version of electronic jamming equipment. It's just extraordinary. So we need to stay on top of that as well.
Thank you. And the committee does recognize you are all experts here. The General just has the unique situation where people will literally shoot at her. So thank you for your service. Going now back to Ms. Tester-Dirksen, please, for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. I want to pick up on something that Ms. Yip was asking about with respect to the facility. So kind of a more specific question. And I know it's repeatedly been brought up that there were things that you weren't necessarily anticipating with respect to the design requirements. But and pardon, the frankness of the question, did we miss something? I think when you're procuring very expensive aircraft, you would have a pretty good idea of what the requirements for the facility that they'd be housed in would be, security or built form and that sort of thing. I'm not an expert, so I'll rely on you to kind of fill us in on that a little bit.
Thank you for the question. We launched modified design build contracts for the 2 facilities in 2020, and since that time have been pursuing the design work for the facilities. Before the government decision to proceed with the F-35, we were at about 80% design on the facilities. So we had a pretty good sense already of what the facilities need to look like. We did anticipate some change post a decision on the selected fighter. But to be frank, we didn't expect the extent of that change and just how specific some of those requirements are. And so that led to the design changes that I spoke to earlier. But we did have a very good sense of what a fighter squadron facility needed to look like.
Okay. I presume that at some point in the future, we will be undergoing this process again where we're procuring more aircraft. Hopefully we'll all be retired by then, but we'll be procuring more aircraft. So looking backward, is there anything that you would do different next time with this knowledge that you could potentially be facing design requirements that weren't anticipated?
Certainly, this is the first time Canada has developed infrastructure for a 5th-generation capability. It's highly complex for some of the reasons that we've already covered. And so we've learned a heck of a lot, actually, as part of this design process. We've been working very closely with Alice Dunn, the contractor. Through the design pre-decision, we had learned a lot of lessons that we had applied in the design post-decision as we made the adjustments to the new requirements. So we are in a kind of a constant learning mode on this, and we would be applying those lessons very much in the context of future acquisitions, for sure.
That's great. Do you think there would be an opportunity to actually kind of codify that knowledge, like capture it? I know anecdotally it's something that you may talk about in the future, but is there a way or is there a process that you would turn that into a best practice that's actually documented in like a manual or something like that?
I don't know about a manual per se, but my team actively documents lessons learned to be able to apply these next time. Infrastructure is often a step or two behind, just simply because we build to the requirements of the equipment that is being procured. And so we're always looking for ways to keep pace with equipment acquisition to ensure that infrastructure is there in time. And so these are exactly the type of lessons that we learn and document and kind of build into the work that we do going forward.
Good to hear. And now I'll go to a very broad question with respect to methodologies and research. So this has obviously been a very extensive overview of a procurement, major defense procurement process. Like we talked about equipment, the storage, the training. What types of methodologies and research went into, and this would be for the attorney, I just made you a lawyer, congratulations, the Auditor General. What types of research and methodologies went into your report?
I'm sure many of the lawyers who work for me would be happy if I was a lawyer. But so, I mean, when you talk about research for comparisons or what we do for audits, so they would be different. We definitely have data scientists who help support us when we do sampling and stratifying of populations. Here, we would have been looking for some advice from a technical nature. Not to put Nick on the spot, but he audits national defense for decades now, and so he does understand them a lot. So we typically try to compare when we can to foreign countries, a little more difficult in this space for sure. We do definitely pay attention to what the Government Accountability Office has been doing. They have lots of work on fighter jets and have been talking about increasing costs just coming out of this in general for the F-35. So, I mean, it depends on the topic. It's a very broad question. It would depend on the topic. If it was in the health field, I could tell you we'd go seek out experts there if we don't necessarily have them. So We have the ability to go get what we don't believe we have in-house, and then we do rely on the experts that we actually audit. We don't take for granted that they do this day to day and they know, but we take sort of a step back and independent, unbiased view of things.
A brief question. You're out of time, but if you have a follow-up question, please go ahead, Ms. Tessa Dirksen.
Just going to ask that if in this particular instance, did you sense that there were gaps in the information that you had before you to make reasonable determinations in your reports? Or were you pretty satisfied with the data that you were able to access?
No, absolutely. We didn't have any access issues here whatsoever. We had the required security clearance needed to have the conversations and to look at the information that we looked at. And I wouldn't cite an issue here whatsoever on this file. No.
Thank you very much. We're going to just have a truncated last round, which will give 3 members various times, and again, to give the government the last slot, I mix it up. I want to go Monsieur Deltel, puis Monsieur Deltel, Monsieur Le Maire, puis this afternoon. So Monsieur Deltel, vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
5 minutes, Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to continue on the conversation with Mr. Couric a little earlier. You were talking about war, unfortunate war, and there is an acceleration of what is happening. We remember Billy Bishop, we remember World War II, and so on. And that's where we find ourselves today, once again. Without getting too much into detail for security purposes, does the RCAF have drones? And what is the situation if so? We have some for each of the services, for the Navy, for the land forces, and also for the air forces. It depends on the needs and the effect that we are seeking to deliver. There is a research as well, but we have a lot of people working on it with us. Where are they made? All over Canada. There are experts. There are companies in Quebec, in Ontario, in Alberta, really throughout Canada. And right now, we receive messages on a daily basis from companies throughout Canada that want to help us, particularly in the area of drones. Well, in exploring this area, is that part of the expansion plans for the RCAF and for the other forces? Are they going to be using drones or certain types of drones versus another type of drone? Well, yes, there is an investment in the future for sure that's coming, not just for us, but for other services. But it depends on the effect that you are seeking. There are some drones that can carry cargo, payloads over short distances. They're very heavy. And if and maybe you want to deliver something very quickly, very nearby.
We'll later this month or in November have a drone exercise in urban Ottawa. So you will be able to see, we'll give due warning, and of course Transport Canada is aware, to test all kinds of drones in downtown Ottawa to see what there might be that we might need to purchase. Beyond that, we are doing research and inviting other countries to come and show us what they have in terms of drones. So all the different kinds, though. We also do research in Halifax Harbour on underwater drones.
Alors, pas besoin de vous dire qu'on est très intéressé pour la suite.
No need to say we are very interested to hear what will happen. And will that affect your point of view? For us in Canada, there's a lot of expertise. This is an opportunity that we have to further develop expertise that already exists. Before concluding, I want to come back to a point that's very important in Ms. Hogan's in the 7th report, in the paragraphs 7, where she talks about shortages that exist. Ms. Hogan, are we technically ready when the planes are going to be ready? Will everything be ready? Well, how do you read the situation? Thank you for your question. This is something we're working on in a very deliberate fashion. Changes for training and the replacement of our training fleets to be able to train more pilots. So we're very aware of the situation. Since 2018, we've seen some initiatives that have increased our workforce, our numbers, and which have allowed us also to have increased experience. And that's very important. We want to be able to pursue our plans, to continue to measure and to verify the conditions every year on a yearly basis. What we want to build is the capacity of the F-35s. We want to be able to see the extent to which we will be operational in the parameters that we have. We want to rebuild, and to what extent? Well, I have to continue working on that. But there's also the matter of maintenance staff. We want to increase the support capacity overall. Information, planning for positions. You've spoken about security. So security forces. In that area, we want to build our strengths, all those areas. And that is something that is quite a pressing need in the RCAF, which would allow us to grow. Well, thank you so much. Mr. Lemire, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. I'm going to speak very quickly about Bagotville. In January 23, the former minister assessed the work at Bagotville at $500 million, but there was an investment made of only $125 million. How do you explain the difference? What is the gap? There is nothing extraordinary there. First of all, that's the first year, and we pay out on a yearly basis as we go along because it's a very complex project. But we see that there's going to be some delay. Can you not accelerate? Well, to date, we've been able to allocate $125 million in commitments, $319 million to build the QRA, the Quick Reaction Area, and also to provide for the construction of the infrastructure for the fighter planes. Yes, but, you know, we have to defend the Arctic, the sovereignty of the North. It's very important to show our presence there. All that equipment is centered in one place. Abitibi-Témiscamingue is an ideal place in a northern area to do this. Surely, if you want to be able to increase your investment and you want to be able to increase the search and rescue possibilities, Abitibi-Témiscamingue is, to my mind, the ideal place to do all that. We're always happy to have more aid in the regions and particularly in the north. We are in the process of checking what the northern operational support hubs are. We've identified Iqaluit, Inuvik, and Yellowknife, and we're looking for 2 others. But they're far further north than Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Yeah, but you want to be able to be in an area where you can connect with the TransCanada and also with the railway network. Yeah, sure, thanks.
And Mr. Osborne, you'll take us out for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess for the deputy, the Auditor General found that National Defence was more reactive than proactive in terms of risk management. So effective planning, risk management are paramount, especially as we see the geopolitical and the risks. Can you talk about the improvements you've put in place so that you become more proactive?
Auditor General is exactly right. The department has traditionally been very, very risk averse, very controlled in decision making and in purposeful spending. And that is largely because of the constraints around the operating capabilities of the department in terms of resources, not enough people, not enough money. This has changed. And with it it has become necessary to shift significantly how we evaluate risk and how we manage it, and then, of course, how we mitigate what the different risks are. And laden on top of that are what you mentioned, the geopolitical situation has changed. We are in a different world from where we were even 3 years ago, 4 years ago, pre-pandemic. So this has meant an entire shift in the whole conversation in the department with the military as well as with civilians. And even I would go so far as to add our colleagues around town, because we have to take a completely different lens to the future of the Department of National Defense and of the CAF with funding now that we can see coming for decades at a much higher level than was the case before. And we are going to be relying not only on our existing partners, but for instance, the creation of the new Defense Investment Agency is going to help us manage that risk and going to help us deliver projects and programs much faster than has been the case to date.
Thank you. And that you led perfectly into my next question, and probably for the Lieutenant General more so, but the commitment of the Prime Minister and of Canada to meet NATO's spending targets, 2%, 3.5%, and 5%. It presents tremendous opportunity and excitement, I would say, for you. But, you know, at the same time, the risks to our sovereignty and the tensions globally create additional challenges. Looking at the National Defence Industrial Strategy, for example, can we talk about what that means for Canada's economy, what it means for Canada's workforce, the benefits to Canada and the benefits to our forces with the increased spending? What does the future look like?
The defense, and I'll pass it over to you in a sec. The Defense Industrial Strategy is in definition phase, to use a military term, right now. We've spoken with over 1,000 people. We've had input from all across the country, deliberately sought out the views of provinces and territories, First Nations, communities. We're gathering all that together. The goal of the strategy will be to increase investment in the defense industry, to enable that to happen with the support not only of the government, but with the private sector as well, and to make sure that the end result are sovereign capabilities. We were talking about drones earlier, access to capabilities that we will always need, that we can then find at home and be able to rely on those in the future. We're doing that, of course, in close collaboration with the military to make sure what we're targeting as sovereign capabilities are the ones that they need, not just now, but in the future as well.
So thank you. And I would just maybe add 3 points that would summarize my view of the way you frame that. It is an amazing opportunity. You know, we're very grateful for the increased investment. The RCAF has been on a path of modernization. It's the biggest one since the Second World War, and so that we are creating the air and space force that Canada needs, not just now, but for decades to come. With this increased investment, certainly the opportunities to work differently with industry are, I believe, there's a tremendous prospect there. It's also allowing us to fix some of the foundations because of frankly, there has been lack of investment over several decades. So fixing infrastructure has been a focus, digital transformation is a focus, and those are going to allow us to then modernize more effectively. It's really key, as mentioned, about the risk approach. So how we do this is going to be very important. And as you mentioned, it is a positive opportunity, but it is also quite challenging. And it's important that we spend the money and the investments judiciously and ensure that we have continued value for money and that we're able to, show Canadians and reassure them that this is happening in a positive manner and for the sovereignty and safety of Canadians.
Thank you. You have a quick follow-up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, one quick follow-up. I know in addition to Bagottville and Cold Lake, there are several other fighter locations across the country. So I know each region is hoping for upgrades and investments, especially as we look at the F-35. Can you give us some indication what that would look like for the other locations throughout the country?
Certainly from an infrastructure perspective, there is a lot of focus on Bagottville and Cold Lake, but as you've mentioned, they're not the only parts of the country. So all of the forward operating locations, we have 3 of them in the north. Those will be upgraded to a whole range of infrastructure initiatives, including airfield rehabilitation, power grid modernization, runway work, facilities work. There's also the deployed operating bases that are across the country. I'm going to miss one, I think, but Greenwood, Comox, Goose Bay, Winnipeg and Trenton. Those will all receive upgrades as well. And then beyond that, we've got 3 command centers, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and North Bay. Those 2 will receive upgrades, particularly for command and control to be able to operate the fighters and other aircraft.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for the information you provided today. I do want to thank everyone coming in today and being so forthright with your answers. The committee will kind of take this up and decide where we want to go from here, but I think this has been a very good meeting. Before I excuse everyone and adjourn the meeting, I just want to let everyone know the request for a 11 a.m. 10 a.m. It's 10 a.m. start time on October 21st, Tuesday, for the committee has been approved. So on that day, instead of meeting in the afternoon, we will be meeting as Parliament opens at 10 a.m. Pardon me, with the Auditor General to get her public comments on the report right away with this committee. This is standard for this, but that has been approved by the various whips for that to happen. So without further ado, I'll excuse the witnesses. Thank you very, very much, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Merci aux interprètes et aux équipes techniques.